My question to you is going a little deeper into the thread of conversation that has been running so far. One of the thoughts that comes to me is one needs to think of social media as a smaller reflection of what happens in the real world. The same kind of problems, maybe albeit a different hue to them. Uh, so, both of you kind of mentioned some things which seem to me about clarity of thought. In the sense, if you're clear about yourself or about how you're using the media available to you, uh, its power or its reach or whatever it is, to reach out to either relationships, professional or personal use, that is besides the point. How does one reach a point where one can be clearer about one's own self and not get entangled into uh, the need to seek this kind of validation?
I don't think there's ever a need where you don't need to seek validation. I think that's what you call achieving moksha, wherein you don't need anything at all. You are content either way. So I think validation always will be needed in one form or the other. Now, when it comes to social media and your gratification or your validation that you seek from social media, the way to reduce that, I think, would be to seek validation in real life instead. To seek validation in the things that you do in terms of your real life instead of the virtual life that you lead. I think the moment we realize that the validation that we get in real life matters more than the validation that we get online or through the virtual world, I think that's where everybody realizes that the aspects of social media or the things that are harmful to you towards the social media will never affect you again. Because you don't view social media as a platform to achieve or the only source to achieve validation. There are so many cases with like where people just want to post and be famous online, be famous on YouTube and Instagram, just so that they can get that validation, that feeling that okay, I've made it something, I've done something in my life. I think the moment like they achieve the same form of validation and when they try to in real life, I think all of this just floats away. At the end of it, I think it's a game of gratification and validation. It's a game of satisfying your needs. Some people project their needs, and there have been cases, like I said, like you only follow what you project, right? And if somebody projects something that you like, you instantly want to run towards it. Now imagine a state wherein there are certain people who've gained the validation of millions and billions all over the world, and that too instantly. Now somebody would see that without having any need or any way of people appreciating them. I think mostly in the Indian culture especially, like we always have a way to put down people rather than lift them up. Like even when we consider our parents or anything, it's always passive aggressiveness. It's never motivational per se. It's always the negative motivation. And I think that's what stemmed into most of the social media. I think that's honestly everything that we do to this day always has to do with something like where we seek a certain kind of relief from this. And at least that's been my personal experience on social media, wherein if I do something and I get certain validation for it that I wouldn't get in real life because of the circumstances that change. Because in online social media, I think there's no cultural bias. There's no predetermined cultural bias. Like let's just say you were in India or you're in US. What you post is what you post and it remains the same. There is different ways to view it, yes, but I think what people see is an uncultured, unbiased way to see it. And that validation is much more easily gotten than the one you get in real life. And I think that's why people most of the time get hooked on social media.
Anand, I want to color it differently. It's a beautiful point that he's made. Although it's positive, I want to ask, is social media an escape from real life then? For some people,
For some people, definitely yes. I'd say if you look at the example of these social media influencers who apparently make money just out of their online presence, the question to ask here is what exactly are you influencing people to do? You're influencing people to engage in consumerism. You're influencing people to adopt lifestyles and habits that aren't really in their best interest or aren't really affordable to them. So, it here is that, I mean, it's here that you take a step back and ask, are you going to social media to really probably enhance yourself or your values, or are you just going there to mimic someone's uh, claim to fame or mirror someone's habits? What are you getting influenced to do? It's necessary to ask the values that you're instilling within yourself when you try to escape into social media.
प्रियम, इस पे मेरे को एक डिफरेंट क्वेश्चन है. आप दोनों इतने दोनों क्लियर हो, तो वापस क्वेश्चन वही है कि व्हेन आई कम टू फेसबुक, जब मैं कुछ पोस्ट करता हूँ एंड व्हेन आई वांट people to like it, sometimes I'm real about it. As a writer, sometimes I have a poetic feel to something I want to say, and I'll end up putting some poetry on my Facebook. There have been times when I've been surprised that people have liked it so much that I have to revisit my poem and say, "अरे ये क्या लिख दिया भाई? समझा नहीं मुझे तो." It's an expression that I have, but suddenly 50, 70, 80, 100 people liking it and then sharing it, and then you're like, okay. Then you really, it has made me ponder over my own writing because I'm a professional writer. तो real life में तो यार client पैसे देता है लिखने के, और मैं बहुत कोशिश करता हूँ, बहुत मारामारी होती है, फिर पैसे मिलते हैं. They always keep on saying ये ठीक नहीं था, वो ठीक नहीं था. You know the works. तो ऐसे लगता है कि यार वो, जैसे प्रियम ने बोला कि वो वैलिडेशन मिल गया कि अरे यार मतलब मैं अच्छा लिखता हूँ, लोगों को पसंद है. They are not getting money and I am not getting, there is no commercial exchange here. बट मेरा सवाल ये है कि एक डिमार्केशन की कोई लाइन अंदर होनी जरूरी है कि चलता है, कभी कभी ऐसा हुआ तो भी ठीक है, बट ओवर आर्किंग अपना थीम या क्लैरिटी हो कि जिंदगी में क्या चाहिए और तुम क्या कर रहे हो. जो इससे पहले द पॉइंट दैट यू मेड दैट यू हैव टू बी लुकिंग फॉर वैलिडेशन इन रियल लाइफ. तो you're out there in the market, you're doing certain things, whether in your relationships personally or professionally. I'll give you a very lovely example. I was listening to this I think 14-15 minute talk by someone who was talking about social media. He spoke about a very interesting thing. He gave the example of Tinder. He said today on relationships you just have to swipe right or left and it's either yes or no. And when we were growing up, you had to go through the pain of rejection. You had to go to the opposite sex. You had to strike a conversation. That person had to like you enough to allow the conversation to happen, and it happened on a very small level first. You had to build the relationship, and then something happened. And it's not to say that we were holier than thou and other things didn't happen. The idea being that it took effort, and you have to be ready for negative results as well. Is this social media generation, if I were to call it that, because that's your expression mainly many times, expression of your personal self, like you said, the reason might be what you just said. तो उसमें इंटरनल लाइन कैसे ड्रॉ होगा जब तुम कुछ दिखा रहे हो कि दिस इज माय पर्सोना, भले ही वो रियल है, भले ही वो वही है जो तुम करना चाह रहे हो, कहना चाह रहे हो, और तुमको फ्रीडम मिला है क्योंकि कोई तुमको, नोबडी इज पुटिंग यू डाउन. बट उसके बाद जब जब उसमें कुछ चैलेंजेस आते हैं, अब जैसे मैं पॉडकास्ट का ब्रॉडकास्ट तो कर रहा हूँ ना, वो बंदे के पास जा रहा है, अब जब उसने कुछ भेजना चाहा तो मैं बोलता हूँ यार तुम मेरे स्पेस में मत आओ. तो immediately my way of safeguarding myself was I told him, look, if you want I'll remove you from that list. I also do not want to impose upon you in your personal space. तो ये समझदारी कैसे डेवलप करनी चाहिए?
I think what you're trying to say is like that's assuming that everybody has the same perspective, the same thought. If you want to take it that way, even in real life, like if you go to certain clients or if you meet with certain clients, they obviously pose you with different challenges. So like you have certain things that you like it exactly the way you do, and there are certain things that the client likes it exactly the way he does. He is not going to be, polite about it. He will be harsh about it. He will ask you to make those changes, be it hook or crook, and those bleed into your imaginations. Yes, social media may unbiased. There is a lot of, unbiased opinions and, uncultured, like, not based on any cultural preferences and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you are going to have harsh comments or harsh negativity, or you might even have, explosions in terms of this thing. with everything in life, I think it's just not to let it get to your head at the end of it. Like it's hubris that killed the Greek gods. And I think it's hubris that will kill you even if you are in real life or even if you are presenting your life on virtual reality. At the end of it, everything has to do with, what you think or what you are right now. If you are influenced very easily by things, I think things can go to your head very quickly, and that's what hubris will make you do. It will make you do things that you never would do if you never felt that way. And at the end of the day, I think in online, the presence for hubris is stronger, because the way to become very famous online, or the way to become very, generic and, very likable online is very easy as compared to real life. Yes, it's easier, but also it poses itself with a number of challenges, like, the darker side of the internet. At the end of it, if you are able to, control, or at least, make realize yourself of these emotions, I think you should be fine. And that's where the internal line is. And internal lines always are lines written in sand. They can always be erased and changed, and they constantly are. It isn't anything that's set in stone. It isn't anything that's drawn and just parts through. I think at the end of the day, your internal line will constantly change, and that's a very human and normal thing to do. But it's the realization of the fact that if your decisions get influenced by these changes in the lines, that's where I think the trouble begins, and that's where I think most of our generation suffers.
Okay. अनंत एक ज्यादा इंटरेस्टिंग सवाल है इस पे। कोई डिसिप्लिन हो सकता है ये लाइन को सैंड में थोड़ा और डीप गाड़ने के लिए? Is there anything that one can remind oneself so that one doesn't get? I have realized very often I am unable. I have a 12, 13-year-old daughter. Whenever she has time for me, I don't seem to have time for her because now classes are also on the phone. So when I have time for her, she doesn't have time for me. And it's been happening for a long time, and it lands up creating a bit of ruckus because we are trying to find time for each other. We like each other's company at times. And yet, we'll end up flaring at each other. Okay, look, when I came, you didn't have time. And she lands up, obviously now she's getting into her teenage, so she does tend to express herself better. So in that scenario, how does one, convince oneself about using this media in an ideal manner? Possibly, I'm not saying one is writing some kind of show short discipline, but what works for you? For example, how do you deal with your time on social media and your personal relationships at home, with friends, with studies, whatever?
So I personally make it a point to restrict myself in totality to only about an hour and a half, or maybe a maximum of 2 hours on my phone, whether it's for social media or for any other purpose. So what I do personally is I have an app that blocks me from opening the app in case I exceed the time limit. So I can devote my energies to other more productive things, or talk to people in real life, maybe go for a walk if nothing else, read a book. So that's what I do to have some sort of self-discipline on a daily basis.
Wonderful.